Thank you for coming to the third lecture in the series of 4 lectures that Peter's giving us this year. I'm in the rather unenviable position of introducing someone who needs no introduction. However, inevitably, I will say a few words. I'm particularly pleased to introduce Peter tonight. For many years we worked together on the March GAD course, or rather the AD, it was at the time that Peter effectively invented the course. It's a measure of the success of that course, the number of staff that are teaching at the Bartlett and around the world, and also how that course has been copied. It's popped up all over the UK. It didn't exist, I don't think, for 9 years classes before Peter effectively invented it. And now, looking back, it's remarkable that it's actually 6 years since Peter was part of that series. And I'm very pleased to say that through the GAD in March, we have invited him back last year to give prizes for the end of the year, and we feel that we've been instrumental in encouraging people to the school, and this lecture series is a corollary of that. I'm told by Peter that this third lecture is the jolly one. You're all very, very lucky tonight to see the jolly one. The first one was about Englishness. The second one was about things he didn't particularly like. I missed that one, I was ill. So I'm pleased to say this is the jolly one. And also, I'm very pleased to announce that we're also going to see a snippet of Peter's first building in the UK. So, I'm
very much snippet.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on a cold night. And I'm calling it nosing forward because I have a predilection for noses. And Andrew thought it was because I like gossip so much, and he thought it was going to be about that. That maybe is for another lecture. But this is an architectural nosing. But of course, nosing is a very useful term for now. That thing has gone off. I can't tell you. What am I to do? Yes. There we are. So it's going to be pictures all the way. It's a lecture about things more or less architectural, so I will deviate from project. And I will move from early days. I don't know whether some of you have seen this before. It might have cropped up in the English lecture, but I'm drawing attention really biographically to my origins as a seaside person. Because as a son of an army officer, I moved to about 15 different towns, of which only 4 were seaside, including the place I was born in. But I think I associate the seaside psychologically. You know, the seaside for the North, many of you are not North Europeans, and those of you who are will understand, I think for the North European, particularly the English North European, the seaside is a very particular place where people don't behave in the proper way. They once a year let their hair down, as we say, or do very, very strange things. Because they've been selling ice creams on board the beach, as I have, you will notice that people do very, very strange things on the beach and expose all sorts of parts of their infrastructure that you wouldn't have expected. Anyhow, one of the seaside towns I lived in for a while was Felixstowe. It's a very modest East Anglia seaside resort. And at that time, it was about 3 or 4 years before I started reading books about architecture. I just remained knowing this funny collection of buildings, which was actually the Bartlett Fun Fair at the time. And I believe it's still there. What I didn't realise was why was I fascinated by those 3 buildings? Was it because they didn't look like anything, even in all the 14 towns I lived in by that time? Was it that they were nothing to do with sort of the traditions of East Anglia? And I've labelled what, in fact, I suppose in later times, one would have recognised they were. The helter skelter was, in fact, a kind of megastructure, a wooden megastructure. The crazy house at the bottom has some similarities to the kind of expressionism that one of the countries discovered from books about strange things in Germany going on in the 1920s and 30s. And Art Deco, which is associated really with the rather more high style in Paris or wherever, or New York, this was in fact East Andean Art Deco. In other words, they were quite exotic, but they were architecturally exotic. But I didn't know what they were, I just thought they were fascinating. Later, in Bournemouth, where incidentally I went to my first school of architecture, I realized that certain things are very useful to have. Later, we got tied up with the discussion of technology, the discussion of the cabin, of the capsule, of the machine's relationship to urbanism. But no, it was simply a way of getting up and down the cliff. If you were wealthy, you paid a penny to go down the cliff, and if you were tired, you pay a penny to go up the cliff. That was all it was. It was just a nonchalant. Ever since that time, I've enjoyed the nonchalance of mechanical devices as part of urbanism. Bournemouth is an interesting town in that it's a great repository for neo-Gothic architecture of the 19th century. It's also a popular seaside resort, but its architecture school at that time, in a sense, was an anachronism because it was the last place in England where you were still insisted upon to design by using the 5 orders of architecture, which you had to learn to draw by using proportional dividers and so on. And we worked our way through this book by James Gibbs, who was the architect of St Marston Fields, called Rules for Drawing the Several Parts of Architecture. And there are some pages from it. And if you were the diligent, keen student that I purported to be in the picture, you then followed the rules, you learned the rules. Now, the funny thing was that actually I had been looking at books of architecture 2 years before I went to this school, and I'd already reached modern. In fact, I was an enthusiast for modern architecture because I lived in towns which had Roman remains and lots of medieval churches. Been there, done that. I'd moved into one. And then suddenly, in the schools, pulled back to this other attitude towards architecture. Nonetheless, there were aspects of Bournemouth environment which still come back to me and probably affect my later work. There was the Arcadian aspect of Bournemouth, the notion of these walks between the pine woods, sometimes with caged birds, sometimes with rockeries, but sometimes the sound of running water. And in amongst those Arcadian walks were strange little objects, which were, of course, useful, in this case, a place for storing water, but it might have been for something else. And one became used to that kind of slightly winsome aspect of the picturesque, which those of you, again, who are not English, should beware. Beware of the English when they get winsome, and when they get picturesque. But what I'd actually been enthusiastic about already was stuff like this. Totally unlike anything that I'd ever seen in Leicester or Darlington or Bournemouth or Felixstowe or all the places that I've lived in. Not really like architecture at all. Much, much lighter. Much more febrile. And then I came to London, went to the A, started wearing leather jackets, did funny drawings, which were, again, going back, in a sense, to the spirit that I had before going to that little school. In other words, yes, I had learned how to draw the Assyrian temples in axonometric and cast shadows from them, but that was not what I particularly wanted to be doing. And I met, as you all know, I came upon various people who eventually coagulated together to form the Archigram Group. And we made this magazine, which was really a sort of cri de coeur to the rest of the world, that A, we were interesting, B, other things were interesting, C, things were interesting that weren't particularly architecture, D, things were interesting that were going on in other places in the world, even if we didn't know quite why. And you will notice, even from the 6 examples down to the 9 here, the magazine itself was perversely different each time. just about every which way to do a piece of standard offset lito paper. And we sent our own work out. However much we toiled over these towers, we then did a pop-up page and said, oh, why not? Why not? Enjoy. But in fact, because we were a coalition of different people, I think we had very different tastes in clothing, and people, in music, and books. But we shared somebody was interviewing me yesterday and said, well, what was it that linked you together? And I said it was the spirit of not just doing what has to be done in the normal, boring English building, whatever that might be, because of kind of cussed perversity. There was an undertone, I think, certainly by the time of our Grand Four, and particularly Ron Herron, Warren Chalk, and myself were very, very interested in the 20th century, certain aspects of the 20th century avant-garde, particularly what had been going on in Germany in the 1920s, particularly the work, and we were introduced to this by Fred Bauman, of course, particularly the work that was done by Bruno Taub and his magazine Fröhlich, Free Light, and the Glass Chain, which is a group of people that used to write to each other. Also, rather like ourselves in Archigram, we're a coalition of people who had a certain sort of mutual admiration, but weren't necessarily doing exactly the same thing. I think that's something that I have to put right while I'm still alive, because there are all sorts of crappy historians out there who always get it all wrong. That we weren't all thinking the same thoughts, but we were all broadly, we would say to each other, apropos a piece of drawing or something, that doesn't upset. We never said who the them were, but we all knew that we wanted to extend the vocabulary of architecture. We wanted to redefine what was the series of procedures that you go through. And often today, one enters the conversation about typologies. And I've always had an irritation with the notion of typologies. I know that whole German architecture schools are based upon the procession of typology upon typology upon typology. But I've always been suspicious about that. And I think Archigram is fundamentally suspicious that why should a chair just be a chair? Could it not be a house? Could it not be a vehicle? Could it not be a means to move from one state to another? Why should a building necessarily have a ceiling? Does a ceiling become a suit of clothes and so on? That these convenient typologies can be broken. And one did a number. This was actually paid for whilst I was a fully paid employee of Taylor Woodrow Construction, who we were working for August at the time. Taylor Woodrow Construction discovered after about 2 or 3 years that she was sort of pouring money down the drain while these wackers were sort of doing all these strange projects. But nonetheless, it was a very useful period in which one was able to experiment, in a sense, with the notion of the tower as an armature in this instance. And that tower was the progenitor of the Plug-in City, which occupied me at the period at which then, having booted us out of Taylor Woodrow, I was just lucky enough to land a teaching job at the A, where I'd been a critic already for a couple of years, a rather vociferous critic, I suppose. Some sort of clever, picky young critic, but anyhow, they hired me. And of course, I never had the advantage of anonymity. The normal procedure, if you're a moderately bright person around town, is that somebody gets you on crits, and then somebody says, you would like to do a day of teaching, and then, can you help me out, you know, and then you sort of emerge vaguely. And the students sort of think, well, at least he's listening to me, so I'll take note, but they don't necessarily know what you do. I never had that dubious privilege, because this thing was published 6 weeks before I was taken on to teach. Everybody had seen it in the Sunday Times colour supplement. All those guys sat there saying, "It must be taught like that." sky. What are we going to do that kind of thing? In fact, I assuaged them, I think, by becoming, as one does, kind of amateur psychologist as teacher, and didn't hold it. I was so exhausted by being an amateur psychologist, soothing people who were often older than me, one of them twice my age, and dealing with their paranoias and their problems and how to turn a corner of a staircase, and, you know, my brother hates me and all that stuff. So that, in fact, I didn't hardly draw anything for about a year. The gap between the axonometric plug-in city 1964 and this drawing done in the summer of 1960, it says 1964, but I thought it was 19. Anyhow, there was a long gap between the earlier set of drawing, pre-teaching, and when I took a bit of a deep breath in the summer and started drawing again. And because one took oneself with you, as we started to travel, there were strange morphings of culture in the sense that I sat in Los Angeles drawing this drawing, but thinking it in the context of England. Yet certain aspects of the instant city owed something to the observation of Los Angeles as it was then, as a sort of instant ticky-tacky odd things in the corner place. Ron Heron, my late friend, was also in Los Angeles doing his version of Instant City, but he sensibly located his Instant City in Los Angeles. And then as one started to move, I've undertaken a weird kind of private operation of my own, which is called making a proposal for a tower. Here and there and here and there. I made a sort of funny rule, with one exception, that I must know the town for at least a month before I'm arrogant enough to suggest a tower for it. And the tower really becomes a repository for my observation of the town and picking up certain characteristics of that town. For example, this old one in Oslo takes account of the fact that there are many dark evenings in Oslo, which I know Christine and CJ can back me up on that. There are many dark, murky evenings in Oslo, and their ability to use cheap electricity, hydroelectricity, and the significance of the lantern becomes very important. So this set of towns really based upon the initiative of the lantern, and in daytime, the coloration of the same buildings is based upon a certain set of Nordic colours which have been espoused by not only the functionalists, the funkist architects of Norway, but in fact, if you go to the National Gallery, you find that the same colours have been used by landscape painters, because in fact those colours exist up on the central Norwegian plateau. Moving around the world to Brisbane, watching the way in which certain kind of bungalows, certain kind of metal houses on legs because they keep the bugs off, and allowing the natural breeze in a hot, sticky town to operate, suggested to me that you could, in fact, for Brisbane, make a tower which was a succession of these bungalows, instead of one on top of the other. In Tel Aviv, looking at the predicament of the city and saying it also needs a building which has the ability to deal with the sun, and perhaps that ability to deal with the sun can be a very fluid set of drapes that operate around and animate. Looking at Paris, again, the tower armature is used to pose two propositions, one to the side of the other. The first in blue, a series of rotating apartments. You can turn the apartment when you're just after the sun with the people grumbling next door, or you want to turn towards the view of the Seine or whatever. And behind it, a climbing garden. I'm not sure whether Paris is into climbing gardens. Maybe that's a bit of bringing into Paris. I'm not sure. But back in England, one then uses the idea of dribbling water down the side of the building. And that, in a sense, was a housing quotation of something that Christine and I did in Osaka, where we took a pavilion and we poured the water over the pavilion, and then it dribbled down discharged under your feet. And that was an interesting case of taking a small project and using it to animate a larger project. Back in Tel Aviv again, it's my wife's town. Well, I was interested in the entrepreneurial character of Tel Aviv. And there's the site plan, actually. That circle, that green circle, was set up by us, blue-ness and Oscar Niemeyer, who suggested a ring of buildings around this big circular space, and then left town saying, what you ought to do is to put 3 towers in the middle. But they never did, and it still haven't. Got very posh shops around the ring, but nothing in the middle. So I said, okay, I'll suggest a housing tower, and an entrepreneurial tower, and a car parking tower. And the one you see in the middle is the entrepreneurial tower, where the different categories of entrepreneurship are represented effectively by different buildings, one piled upon the other. In the same way that you might deal with the kebab, where you stick the tomato and the meat and I don't know, whatever, on the kebab, and each has its own presence, but the total thing is the kebab. Another preoccupation which has recurred and recurred and recurred, and still one wants to do it, one wants to do one of these, is the notion of vegetation. In this castle in Würzburg, what was interesting to me is that there are 9 or 10 striations of husbandry. A box hedge, a lower hedge, some little sort of Christmas tree things, then the park, then the other hedge, then the arbor, then the embankment with more vegetation, and then and the man is in different ways and different tricks attempting to claim to control the vegetation, but the vegetation always wins, of course. But it shows what you can do with a single kind of organic type and play patterns with it. I'm fascinated by this issue of control and choice, which cropped up in another project. I believe, Candy tells me that in the first lecture I used this slide, I think it's still in the context here, where what interests me is this question of control and mystery. That in the foreground, of course, the hedges are completely controlled, completely clipped. In the middle ground, the trees are sensibly and intelligently placed. But in the background, who knows? Ghosties, perhaps. And Gavin Rowbottom, my partner in crime, and I did 6 years ago, with the help of Jenna, I think is in the audience, we made this sort of semi-survey of East London and suggested a number of places where vegetated buildings could be inserted, particularly with allotments, particularly with vertical planting of vegetables, and really all the time looking back at another favourite of mine, which is another German castle in Karlsruhe, where this particular structure, in the middle of the 19th century, was created in order to have groves hanging up it. In fact, it never had glass. It was always intended to be a place where the vegetation would make the presence of the object. The other day I was in Melbourne, and we quite enjoyed this little number in a rather sedate suburb. And, of course, one has quoted them from the Karlsruhe example and said, why can one not build a number of structures which are either almost vertical paths or where the vegetation is an extremely important constituent element of the architecture itself. Later as in Crab, we developed this project, which was to face a remaining villa, remaining bourgeois villa in the middle of town, where there was a convenient flank of wall. We suggested that the flank could be developed into hedge houses, which would in fact be parts of a small department store. There would then be a watercourse between the hedge houses and the garden and the villa itself. We got planning permission for this project, and then Spain went AWOL, money-wise. Another the idea of change, metamorphosis. In an old underground project, the instant village, a hovercraft would arrive and then metamorphose into an enclosed village. And with Christine later in Franco, we've had the advantage of having a small canteen, which in the summer metamorphoses into a new kind of space. This metamorphic thing leads one sometimes into very, very strange territory. This is a project inspired by the idea of the West, not just West Berlin, but the Wild West, and the cactus from the Wild West becomes the generator of the architecture. Leads again to strange conditions. Or, in a sense, a combination of the conversation about metamorphosis and vegetation. In the veg class, the enclosed area, the triangular area, starts off fairly circumspectly with some little armatures that have vegetation on them, and some closures, car parking space, bed, and then time creeps in. The vegetation increases, some of the beds and things redispose themselves, even the kitchen starts to be surrounded by vegetation. And then time takes over further, and there are hybrids between hi-fi and vegetation, between vines and acoustic panels, between chairs and things that might be creepy crawlers and might not. And these are very loaded by stage 4. The words themselves are very loaded because in the English language, the notion of the glade, it's a romantic place. The idea of weaving has a certain implication or folding. And the project goes on. It gets more and more intense, more and more folded into itself. The paths become more hybridic, and then finally the thing gets so bloody crazy, I say, no, let's just stop. And there can be a village. You can have a village house, you can have a village village. The yellow enclosed areas, of course, are more variegated, and the states of play of each of them may be different from the other. And there are very deliberately territories which are neither land, nor just water, nor just enclosure. And you take yourself with you because you start to observe places where there's this intriguing mixture of the vegetation and the organisation of the city. In Houston, if you look at it from a certain, from the 7th floor of a hotel that Bryce Hall put you in, you see that a large part of Houston has tree cover. There are 2-story buildings with these trees that run endlessly across. I was fascinated by that. Also fascinated by the proposition of Houston as a car-borne city. And so this is a mixture of two things. How to put architecture under the trees, and how to organize the cars on a system of computer-controlled pathways so that you don't have to look when you drive. You just press in the address and it takes you there. Just leave a little time to sort of wake up and get into your hello, here I am face. And that involves another attitude, a very different attitude towards the idea of place and position on the map and city. Much more recently, we have looked at the author of this drawing, the drawer of this drawing, is probably sitting in the audience too, where Gavin and I fed in some of our notions from East London. And then the idea of the carcass, the idea of a non-high-tech place of survival, up which gradually you could creep, up which you could construct temporary, almost do-it-yourself elements, and you creep up as the ground flooded. And you rather like a hollowed-out tree, creep up it, and creep up it, and creep up it, and hopefully survive for a while. But vertical vegetation is in there as well, sort of leftover of some of the other projects, I suppose. Sometimes this reached quite serious conditions, This was a competition within which we were very successful for Murcia. Again, just at the wrong time when the bottom dropped out of the Spanish economy. But here with our friend Salvador, we combined not only conditions of sort of weaving bamboo and bringing water vapor up from tanks in the ground, a lot of passive systems, but also a certain amount of computer-controlled spin systems. And I think this would have been one of our best projects, but it didn't happen. It, in a sense, drew upon the instincts represented by the earlier work, but some of the know-how that was now available. This is a drawing more recently still done, actually drawn in Norway, but coloured in London, not that that matters. That's one does. And it's really a kind of game with myself. Of course, as you can see, I've been fascinated always by the possibility that vegetation can be an extension of the architectural vocabulary. But I'm also interested that architecture might be a kind of woven-in extension of the gardening vocabulary, or that there are, and one is not original in this thinking, there are certain aspects of organisation of, Darcy Thompson book is 100 years old or whatever, but the notion between growth and form and the disposition of formal elements, so that the blue elements are clearly the tectonic elements. And if you look close the middle right near the edge, you can see there's a sort of strip window, so there's obviously somebody's been pissing around between some architecture. But what about some of the other elements, where perhaps within the vegetation there are insertions that are vegetal-like, but might quite possibly be architecture too, and as we expand then into some naughty bits, which very definitely pronounce themselves to be man-made, one pushes the conversation further, and the whole thing is held together, or sustained, if you like, by a certain kind of granular drift, which suggests the implication of growth or movement. But what I'm really interested in is the ambiguity that one sets up between the purely tectonic, the quasi-tectonic, the possibly tectonic, and the certainly not tectonic. Now a digression, that's why I called the lecture mostly architecture, or not entirely architecture. I think I've had to explain for the benefit of those who are not of the Anglo-Saxon origin the term po-face, which was, I think, a term mostly like my parents' generation. I think it's still used. But it means grim and over-serious. I think far too many architects go around being really serious. Really. Look at them. Look at them. It's not totally friendly in the Nazi uniform. Well, it used to be. And look at them. They are so fucking serious. My God. Well, here's a man who wasn't being taken seriously. So, I love Santa Monica, and I like reading the English newspapers. So you get up at 7 o'clock in Santa Monica, go around the corner and buy the English newspapers, one does. And then you see a bloke with an animal on his head. And you say, well, it's Santa Monica, so... But it's not a real animal, because it's a toy animal. Now, I have to, some of you know what's coming next. I'm sure several of you see me do this juxtaposition slide before. One of your great teachers also did animals on his head when he was a postgraduate student. Professor Dr. Marion Coletti, who I think has often been involved today in very serious discussions with John O'Gay, whatever it is, had animals on his head in his first Bartlett project. So I'm rushed to the hotel, and it has, in fact, for those who know, it has the discussion of the animals on the head and why, and led in a circuitous way right towards his PhD thesis. So anybody who wants to have a significant PhD thesis, should join the Animals on 10 group, because I immediately rushed to the email, and emailed a photo of this guy, and I said, "One of your friends?" And I got a mean email straight back from her and said, "There's yet another guy that I know about who's also done Animals on 10." So there's a whole piece of dissertation can be written about the significance of animals on the head. Well, I put silly things on my head at a certain time, and I saw in the newspaper, I should have photographed it, that this week there is some kind of smart glass that is actually able to bring information to an aquarium. So, or of course you go to where there is sausage urbanism. This is particularly present actually in the 4th district of Vienna, since you asked. I was sent there after the lecture by a very nice young lady, gave me the address, and said, "You must go there." Didn't explain why, but she had taken note of the lecture, and in fact, you could see sausage urbanism in the shop window. 4th district of Vienna. Or of course you can see big sausages in Oslo. Big naughty sausages. Or you can see bits of sausage in early Pequot gun drawings. Or, of course, you can have strange situations by which our friend Michael Webb can be seen sitting in an aeroplane in the University of Manitoba, as one does. And this delight, I think, and CJ's here, who knows more about it than I do, but he and I, and a number of other architects, share this admiration for the work of William Keith Robinson, who was mad as a hatter, a bit of a fascist actually, but mad as a hatter, and did all these things. My favourite one, which I can never seem to find a slide of, is the one where there's a bloke with a string, a couple in bed. The guy has a string tied around his big toe. The string goes up over a pulley, down onto a watering can on a ledge outside the window, and then the cats are fronting outside in the middle of the night, so the guy waggles his toe so that the water just drowns off cats. This is bizarre, but in my view, and I would like somebody to develop this as a line of, if you're not interested in animals on here, you might pursue the notion of the connection between the work of William Keith Robinson and the development of high-tech in the 1950s in the UK. There is a connection, I'm sure of it. I'm sure there's Madman, who took great delight in announcing that the Sensory Centre at Norwich has the world's longest neoprene gasket. Come on, that has to come out of Keith Robinson, if you follow what I'm thinking. But I don't think we have a moratorium on this kind of humour. I was in Valparaiso about half a year ago in Chile, and we'd come up a cliff lift, my God. Bournemouth has 2 cliff lifts, but Valparaiso has 20 cliff lifts, of which only 4 work. So there you are. But the important thing is my fascination for kiosks, which you'll see in a moment. I was photographing this bloke in his kiosk. I noticed that he was selling Nestlé's savoury. I'm not sure what that was. This was savoury ice cream, actually. Anyhow, the point was, he saw me doing the photograph, and he bent down, and if you can see it, he brought his dog up, so that I would then take a photograph of the dog operating the kiosk. Which is absolutely English sense of humour, except it's back Chile. The theme of this evening is my love of noses, poking my nose in, or building the nose, or nosing. I'm sure a psychologist would have a field day with my fascination for noses. Everybody in a folded piece of paper can tell me their interpretation of this. I do really seem to like noses, and we are now, my God, building noses. Right? The archogram instinct led to a number of propositions, such as the mobile environment, the machine that could change over, a very primitive version in Brighton, but by the time you get to this London example, it gets closer to the underground proposition. The enclosure which can suddenly empty, the machine, the vehicle, you can sit in it, you can drink in it, you can shelter under it. It's almost a cushion. You bend your brain sideways. And I think what's interesting for me, and my post-rationalisation of my fascination with kiosks, is what they tell you about the place. Without the overtones of proper architecture. In Sweden, the object is modest, modern, the sausage is pleasant, small, the graphic is clear, dull. But in Vienna, they really have a big sausage there, big sausage. Lights up and go, wow! Now, in northern Germany, it's also well-heeled and stylish. Not quite with the airline at Vienna, but certainly not modest. Whereas in LA, you make them big, you eat them big, you breed them big, they're big. There they are. No messing. Whereas in New York, it's mean. No. And in Brisbane, it's the good life, the good Queensland life. And the kiosk is giant. What is the toilet inside of it? It's giant. It's effectively a building, but it is still technically a kiosk. And then I recently was in Melbourne, and I put this as a poser to the Melbourne audience and said, well, okay, your town, what is this telling us about you? It's a much more sophisticated town in Brisbane. It has a number of these little sort of fitted metal things, which then people come and add on to. I also saw, oh no, it's not in the country. I also saw a guy with a chicken sitting, but he wasn't sitting on anything because he had somehow specially prepared wooden leg. I saw a lady singing opera in Melbourne and a bloke on a sort of very primitive electric piano playing perfectly the Castellaneta Sonata. That's Melbourne. That tells you about Melbourne. And then in your mind you extrapolate that back to the sorts of things that have been, and the slightly self-conscious way in which these additions have been made. It's not your kind of, North African Casbah world. It's very particular Melbourne, sweetie, slightly self-conscious. And what do I learn from Tokyo? My favourite kiosk, back into Tel Aviv, is based upon the proposition that was part of the modernist canon, that if you built a boulevard and you planted the trees and the you would walk their dogs down the middle. At the end you would have a little modernist kiosk. And this can be found in many cities. In the Tel Aviv example here, where you would expect things to be difficult and troublesome, here's the most jolly kiosk I've ever seen. The man's taken them on this kiosk. He has this amazing fruit. He always has a long queue, even late into the night. And it's really, really cheerful. Whereas you go to Frankfurt, where you would expect it to be high-powered and cheerful. Lots of guys farting there. There's a sad Turk who just about reluctantly sells you something if you ask him. And so we in Crab have done a number of sorties into the world of the kiosk. Why not? Or its associate element, the boardwalk. The boardwalk where the flaneur can parade, the skater can skate, the guys looking for bird life can stand there looking for bird life. The birds can watch the guys perambulate and so on. So the boardwalk has that sort of, it's not like a proper street, it's a relaxed atmosphere. And to me, my funny mind, it goes well with the kiosk. So here's a project with the kiosks sitting on the boardwalk and living under the legs of self-built building. And that's a Swedish boardwalk, very neatly disposed along the boardwalk. Recently we've been looking again in the area where we are doing building in Gold Coast, Australia, the possibility of an arts boardwalk. And we found a very interesting institution behind some garages, which is called Rabbit and Cocoon, where they're already doing this kind of stuff, but in a sort of unofficial way. And even in Gold Coast, it's a very curious place, you could actually create some kind of infrastructure that would not necessarily be a fully built infrastructure, back into the world of temporary and flexible and the metamorphic. But our favourite crowd project remains, so far, this footbridge. There was a competition in 2008, you see, for a footbridge in Scotland, which is in Eastern Europe, and it's between two sides of the river. One is a car park, one is a department store, so you build a footbridge. And we said, well, it's a stupid competition, we won't win anything, but what can you do with a footbridge? I inevitably, you will now guess, said, I have a kiosk. And Gavin said, why don't we make the kiosk move? You see? And I said, why don't we make the moving kiosk have a bar on top of it? So at 6 o'clock at night, the legs can come in the bar. We then got our friends at the Bureau Havok to do a very sophisticated bridge structure. Totally understand. There's the moving kiosk with the bar on top and the silver bits that look out on the river. Inevitably, the winner was a concrete trough. And one has to take on board the issue of culture, but you must never take it so serious. We, after all, I and Colin is not here today, we did this attack on a certain city, which he knew well, I knew fairly well, because I'd often taken students from this place to see the Grazer architecture, the very interesting architects of roughly the period of 1980 to 2000. And it's also a very agreeable Baroque city. And then you walk along a little quiet Baroque street and bums. Because it's part of the lads, the boy, our friend, the friendly aliens, it has become known. The Kunsthaus, which is an art house, it's a building for taking travelling exhibitions. It is, I was there half a year ago, it's still being kept in extremely good condition. The client still loves it. People go there a lot. It has had its effect upon the district around, as such buildings always do. So the prices of coffee in the immediate blocks around has gone up because it's near the Kunsthaus, and it has appeared on postage stamps. So I guess that's sort of success. We haven't got B now out of the fees, but it is a sort of success. And it really is a very simple building. I think it is simply a pin and a skin. And as you go up, you find a surprise. There are the people going up finding a surprise. And disappear up into an orifice in the underbelly of the gallery spaces. The organisation, the pin simply goes from the most obvious entry point. Don't forget, the advantage of knowing the town is that you don't piss about with all sorts of speculations on where you come in. Obviously, that's where you're going. That's where the tram is, that's the noisy side, that's the quiet side, that's the funky side. You go in there, of course you go in there. Don't mess about. Okay, so you get your diagram. You look at the residual space that is left behind the pre-existing building, so fill it in. Okay, that's what you do. Fill it in, put a skin around, get the travelator up, bolt your uncle. Well, it's not quite as simple as that, but I think it was a characteristic of the project. And we then put these, what Colin calls kangaroo pockets, to contain the escapes and the surfaces and so on. And then there's this mysterious condition of the building on the left. Here we see it from the street, the Kunsthaus proper, and the building on the left which has to be incorporated into, which was rebuilt at great, great expense. They said, this is part of our Austrian heritage. You must preserve it and spend a fifth of your budget on propping this bloody thing up and putting it back into state. It is part of the Austrian heritage. When we found the drawings, the bits had been brought from Sheffield. So much for Austrian heritage. We said, what a laugh! There were some English wallies in the 19th century, sold people of grass some metal. Found a couple of English wallies at the end of the 20th century, sold them some plastic. Heritage, now our building is clearly part of heritage. I'm very cynical about it. And of course it was an opportunity to incorporate certain preoccupations about translucency and transparency, but in the end remains a craft building. We look at it analytically, say yes, it's still a craft building and the surface is still, as is the tiled roof next to it, made by putting pieces together. Though it could not have been made possible without the advent of the computer. We might have dreamt up something like that 20 years before, we wouldn't have known how the hell to put it together, and in fact it would be unbelievably expensive. And it's a pretty giant, I think. What's interesting is that in no way is high-tech. I always refer to it as scrap-tech. It's just an agglomeration of available techniques, cheap bits of metal that were found sometimes in railway sidings in Leipzig, and workers who would come in on bicycles from Ljubljana, and all sorts of strange ways in which you use the availability of the time and place. There was, after all, a very, very strong ironworking tradition in that particular valley. The ironworks there for centuries, therefore there's a tradition of working metal and working wood. And I think that this tradition of technology enables you to actually innovate. And then the building is an agglomeration of car parking and galleries held aloft. And a very wide range of exhibitions has taken place, sometimes involving artists making special installations for it, or films that can be played on the 920 pixels on the skin of the building. And what is very difficult, and as somebody who spent most of one's career drawing or teaching, and then only latterly getting buildings produced, what you can't get from a model even is the significance of the interstitial space, of spaces that you didn't actually design but occur between your building and the next, or in crevices of your own building. This is something that you, maybe enough to do many, many buildings, you'd be able to predict this. It's probably the most exciting aspect. And of course one has the heroic elements of the building. The needle, as we call it at the top, is very, very important to the composition of the building. And after all, one was carrying one's brain, one's memory. The memories of Chernikoff's 101 Fantasies, which was a special book one looked at in the A library when I was a student. And then, of all places, in Valparaiso, you find the most extraordinary quotation of that kind of architecture, again, in the place you least expect it. And one can say, if you take a photograph from the right angle, the building is nestling in the trees. Back to the idea of the artificial object and the natural condition together. Well, the Germans had a wonderful time with the idea of the blob, the grosse blob, the attack of the blob. I would contend the blobism has a very legitimate history in the culture of the United Kingdom. After all, we have our favourite blob. in Kew Gardens. And there is also Mr. Blobby. At this point, I move on to another set of pictures and another. In a sense, in celebration of the fact that Christine is here, rare these days, right? We'll talk about blue for a moment, because I think when we were working together, blue was a very important colour. I'd like to talk about, and I'm lurching back some years to a project that I haven't talked about publicly for a while, and it just popped up in conversation yesterday, and I thought, my God, because I have a little section I want to talk about blue-ness. I remember a project that was about blue, and I'm going to read this. It's the only time I ever read in lectures. This is. I don't like reading in lectures, but this has to be read. And it's a story. I say, late though it was when she finally reached the house, too late to make a perambulation of the park, but instinct led her to the window. In the middle distance it stood, clear, white, round, yet something strange, as if it floated, as if a soft blue mist exhaled from its very state of detachment from the ground. In the bright light of the next day, she realized it contained an object, a small twinkling glass thing. Yet the presence was quiet, latent, unexplained. The descent into the white drum could in no way prepare her for the intensity of the blue. A blue so blue, total. A special secret world from which the stair led upwards to the twinkling thing. Over the next years, she became familiar with its various moods, as various as her own, and often their reciprocal. On a certain day, she might be content to sit below by the pool, letting the odd scattered beams of light remind her of the heat of the day beyond. On another, the sound of the wind jangling through the hanging metal light skirts had its own evocativeness. On another day, her progress upward might be punctuated by moments resting on one of the balconies, within the room that lay within the staircase. As she climbed, the obsessive blue would take on an intensification of her mood, or of the weather. So I became fascinated by this notion of blue, but I think also working with Christine is this issue of blue-ness, and we did, as you know, together, what I refer to as Blue Building number 1, which is the house in Luxembourg, Berlin. When I last saw it a few months ago, it was getting a bit white. But whether we can get them to do something now. It's a social housing, a small piece of social housing. Now, in the years since, we have both done larger pieces of social housing. Christine in Japan, I in Spain. But I think one has an affection for this little blue thing. And perhaps memories of the town at the same time. With Gavin and Salvador, we went on to pursue a project which you will see has its antecedents in that project where I referred to the deck, the boardwalk, the notion of the building poised on legs, boardwalk running through, and the kiosks living on it. And the proposition here was that if you could have some sports facilities on the roof and a series of kiosks under the building, you would have life appearing above and below it, and you would enliven it in a suburb that otherwise is very, very pure and very, very quiet. Well, we got planning permission and we started the building. The building went up to 3rd floor, and then, due to the economic situation, it just stopped. And there was just a dog and a guy and a crane waiting in the wind for a very long time. Finally, they completed it, but without the fancy bits. So this is the actual building, which is on the legs. The kind of carcasses for the kiosks are there. The city didn't want to have anybody up on the roof doing funny things. And the shutters somehow never happened. But 100 families are living there. The flat plans, I think, work rather well. It's there, it's done. It is most of the proposition, but not all. And it does raise the issue of what happens if you have to strip, if you suddenly lose the pieces that make it particularly come alive. You are dependent, of course, upon the fundamental organisation of the thing. And that is a kind of salutary lesson. How much do you load into the primary conditions, and how much can you depend upon the secondary conditions, which nonetheless I think would have made it a very exciting building to be in. It's still probably an all right building. That's a challenge. It would have been a series of colours where the colour of the building would be facing a street where that colour was to be found predominating. So towards the late Yankee-Klitzky's blue building, it's the blue side now, and towards a terracotta street was the red side, and towards the south, the sunny side, the yellow side. In another series of propositions to do with colour, this, which is a strip of Taipei intended for music buildings, or music houses, as they call it. There is a double game going on because the strip at the city end, which is nearest to us on the photograph, the blue building, the rather steel-like building, has a hard architecture, which is nonetheless very coloured. As you move down the strip, in the park of the strip, the buildings loosen. And as the buildings loosen, the colour hardens. So that as you go to the other end, you get the fruitiest buildings, but the state of monochrome. At the city end, you get the hardest buildings, but a state of hard colour. There are a few other games going on, but that is it. Sort of interesting kind of counterpoint between these two progressions. And we retained an interest in this kind of development. Particularly in another tower project here, which I did 2-3 years ago, for a tower in Swiss Cottage, which is near where I live, where one is looking at, again, the juxtaposition of different kinds of tectonic surface and vegetative surface, but also one is looking at the impact of colour on the building. But sometimes we do it in black. Just when you're getting lulled and you think, I've seen that, it's all colour. It's been revolting. Old boats creak in the harbour. Tar. Why not? Or in Italy, in a town that has terracotta, why not the terracotta itself? This is a competition that we won in Bavaria. Unfortunately, the mayor who had generated the competition got booted out. He was the left-wing mayor. The right-wing mayor didn't want to have anything to do with anything the left-wing mayor had done. So the building never happened. But it is still, I'm allowed to admit, one of our favourite projects that we've had in Crown. It's placed in the corner of a town square. It picks up a line from the next square, which then leads to the lake. It picks up the line of that square, crossing the main space, and lancing past that little square building. which is in fact the old trade union house. It has particular significance, particularly if you are a left-wing mayor. And so the notion is that you come from the lake through the square, glance past that, and then slowly climb up into the theatre. The whole point is that I believe that in a small town, it's not the tip-up seat, paid-for play that's the key thing. The theatre is the whole building. The town uses the terracing, the bar that's on the terrace, the restaurant that's on the terrace, the old house which then turned into a gallery. And the market grows onto that same thing. There's a tradition that it doesn't have to be highfalutin performance to create the notion of theatre. Which is not just simple public space, which is coerced or contained public space. And this is a project that I think we worked on very intensively and folded carefully. And it uses the simple juxtaposition of the enclosed spaces and these kind of ambiguous conditions between enclosure and open, and it was supported by some parametric work that Gavin made on its own right. And again, it's interesting when Christine's sitting here. I think it has certainly attitudinal similarities to the project that we did, She and I did for Langham, where one is taking very much into account the physiognomy of the town around and putting your, quite obviously new building, but knitting it and glancing it towards those other pre-existing buildings. Onto towers, back to the 1963 proposition of the tower as armature. So that in the first Taiwan tower we became interested in the idea of algae growing as a public demonstration on the public tower. So the algae producing elements, again some of the authors or some co-authors of this project are sitting in the audience. I hope I'm saying the right thing about it, but in fact they hung like kind of sacs and pockets with all this water pouring through, growing the algae. We were able, in a later version of the competition, to develop the apparatus of the algae growing, more specifically. Also with a museum at the bottom of it. And then, in the third tower, we realized that there were other ways also perhaps demonstrating the harnessing of energy, wind energy, water energy, and the growing of algae. And therefore, and sun energy, sun collecting. So we divided the building into a series of sort of panels, strips, which would carry a lot of these pieces of apparatus. And then wrapping around, again using the tower as an armature, hanging various pieces of operation on it. Again, the museum and laboratories and the wedding hall and the meteorological station, various other elements that are hung within it. And here just some glass glimpses of the types of structure that would be held within the kind of bird's nest of the solar panels, etc. And then it descends down into the park. In Vienna, we entered and won another competition in the park of the Prater, near to this famous wheel, the Prater being just the old Habsburg's hunting ground. And the Vienna Economics University had set up 5 competitions for the various constituent buildings. And we will all finish our buildings, Zaha's building, Chiavi's building, and so on and so forth, will all be finished simultaneously in about 3 months' time. And then we'll open to the next cohort of students. It's an enormous undertaking. And I started doing funny cartoons at this point, and I said, you know, we know the Viennese, get up to all sorts of funny things. Isn't it sad that you know, lots of people leave the university at 5 o'clock in the evening, and you know, they carry on their life. Wouldn't it be great if you could actually live like a Viennese in the university, and actually meaning, can't there be some internal interstitial spaces that aren't designated for specific academic activity? The building is really large. It's 2 buildings actually. One, the left-hand piece is the law faculty, the right-hand piece is the central administration. And we developed the law faculty around what we call sunshine corners, because we're bringing the light in and then having these rather strange delineated orange, these nooks and crannies inside. This is actually a ceiling plan, but it gives, I think, a very clear view of the significance of the interstitial space, places where you can hang out. And then the big lobby piece on the middle is in fact the law library. And it is coloured. It's very coloured. And here we see some more noses. We see corner of one of the sunshine corners, and on the right part of the coffee shop. In fact, as you enter the building, between the 2 buildings, the coffee shop on the right, the end of the admin building, and the students' common room on the left. So you have these 2 smiling sheets that you pass through as you climb up into the building. And the colours change. I'll show that in a moment on the diagram. On the park side, it is our hope, that we don't know, it's for all hope, that not only will the building have this kind of whiskering, these whiskers of the louvers, but actually the vegetation will be encouraged to grow up the building. It'll be interesting to see if that can happen. And the whiskers are to deal with certain light conditions. And in a way, are a necessary layer above the boldness, the lineality, very deliberate lineality of treasure, this screaming runs around it. And they're the louvers, which are very particularly chosen so that they are rough on the outside. They're quite tough, and they will probably go grey, so you get this grey whiskering, and then the bright building lying behind it. The roof of the library is also an extension of the park. And the library, this is fairly old, I haven't got recent photographs of the interior of the library. You can see that this sort of flowing condition runs right into the building. And as you see from this plan, we then plant a series of capsules onto the bridge of the library. So there is this quiet space, almost like pieces of furniture. And we are being allowed to do 100 pieces of the seasoned crab furniture shortly. We're actually being allowed to do crab furniture in the library and public areas, which will make it even, I hope, more exotic. And the coloration is based upon the notion of dark near the ground and light near the sky, the progression of the colours as we move on, with the corridor flooring being reverse pattern. So in the light part of the building, you have the dark floor. In the dark part of the building, you have the light floor. Well, back in Valparaiso, I had the shock of my life. It's been done. It's wonderful when you go somewhere and it's been done. You say bugger, and then you say great, almost in the same breath. It's fantastic. It's a piece of social housing. I think about 40 years old, done as far as we could be told by the expert who was with us, by the local town engineer, and it's extraordinary that there is the idea of the coloured striped building. Well, I will claim that, not quite so extraordinary, one has been playing with the idea for some years, and it's wonderful to be able to say one was drawing this notion. Finally, you get around to doing it. You might then say, Christ, it's a terrible idea. But at least you go through it. From time to time, we do scatty competitions like research centres for tsunami, which are taking our architecture in one direction. And sometimes we're inspired by cycling, which takes our architecture into another direction. Some of these ideas, like the cycling one, we didn't win this competition, but I still like the idea. Sometimes, as I say, one has an idea and you stick it in your back pocket. And it might, like the naughty nozzle in crafts, which is based on an old Mike Webb idea from 1963, dug up by the year 2000 and reworked with the idea of looking through a special nozzle at a building that we've already seen outside in the street, but not bothered with this notion of requotation. I think it can be very useful. I would like to dig up the note to Tinky sitting here and worked on it. That we ought to dig up the old cycle track again on another project. Just as Colin and I dug up the old thing of the translucent, melting translucent piece of skin. You've had these ideas and you say, still, didn't win it, but there's one good idea. You stick it in your back pocket, and at some point or other, it comes out of the old back pocket. Here's an idea which is done in another country. This is I think it was Marcos actually asked me to do a drawing for an issue of AD that he's editing. And I did this drawing called Comfort Veg Club. I like the idea of comfort. I like the idea of vegetables. I like the idea of clubs. So you're a Comfort Veg Club. And it sort of led to the development of the Comfort Veg installation, which was just under a year ago in SIOP. They asked me to do an installation. We developed it. I didn't develop one, but somebody did. We looked at it, and then we found a way of making it. We went over there and we made it with a very enthusiastic bunch of students. And there is the Comfort Veg Club, a development, in essence, of that earlier drawing. And there are a whole lot of people enjoying Comfort Veg. In fact, it was reported to us later that some people enjoyed it extremely naughtily. But, and what one has come to do is then to take that act, so it's got a loop. One said, here's some ideas. Then you make an installation. Then pull back out of the installation. Say, right, we've got that bit of it. Let's now look again at the Comfort Veg Club ideas. I quite like that you can sort of do the drawing, move it to something, then move back, and then move back again. A few more Johnnies that we did last year. The authors of these are sitting here very well. We won a kind of funny competition for Peruvian installation, and we did a strange on-side table in Tel Aviv, and we did some more funny thing. We do lots. And primarily, and I'm coming towards the end of the lecture, you'll be pleased to hear. We are back in Brisbane area, well actually in Queensland, actually in Gold Coast, which is a very weird, interesting town. Sort of Florida-ish in an Aussie kind of way. And the centre building of this campus, the Bond campus, was done by Marshall Sasaki. The building is basically a series of these escape hatches, rather than we were discussing in the Vienna building, places where you can go and just sort of hang out and not do anything in particular. And we have 4 of these, and we call them scoops. They're not like a scoop, sort of ice cream scoops. Each of the scoops has a slightly different physiognomy. To the bottom of the drawing are the studios, then the scoops, which are primary structure. They're also light collectors, so they're doing several jobs at once. Then the street, which runs through the building, and then a series of administration rooms and computer rooms and toilets and so on. Of course, announced to the public by the nose. There's the nose, and he sticks out and says, come in, glance past the nose, and enter the street. And that is the system of the building. See the nose, the scoops, the classrooms. Now, if you have, by the time you do this building, propped up, actually 45, I think it's an underestimate, but many, many years of teaching, organising schools and all, you acquire a certain amount of anecdotal information. And I would say a lot of my input in this project, and Gavin, after all, has talked a lot too, a lot of it that we talked about was the anecdotes. You don't really go to the metric handbook or you know, that tells you how many square meters for how many postgraduate students. You say, well, you know, people do this kind of thing, don't they? And life does imitate art. It was to do with having done the cartoons for the Vienna building and still won the competition. Everybody in the studio said, you've got to do some more for your cartoons. Yeah. Persuaded me into doing one or too many, I think. Yeah. Anyhow, the favourite phrase amongst everybody was this caption of some very pompous, fart-ass, clever dick critic saying, I question your terms of reference, Barbara. He said that's not promoted in Australian accent. And of course, life imitates art. There we are in SIOP with Barbara being questioned about her terms of reference. Or the fact that it's important in architecture to have people coming and going, but not necessarily getting under your hair. So you devise the organisation such that there are. And that was actually borrowing from the architecture department at UCLA, where there is this corridor from which you can look down into the crypt space, but you don't interfere into the crypt. If you want to go and interfere, you go down the stairs and enter. That's what we said, hey, that thing at UCLA, that's around. You sort of collect funny snippets of experience, or the thing that this is a little bit of a sop towards Bond University for saying that people from Princeton will be coming. Right? And the fact there's a lot of goings on in universities often with sort of visiting academics, and somewhere in the corner there's still somebody doing a bit of work, and these people are generally posing and chit-chatting. And the notion that if you give some incentive to work all night, you know, this poor guy probably stands no chance with the girl in black, but he's going to try hanging out to see if anything might happen. Or, you know, the notion of working late, and it's Australia, so the old wine bottles never far away. And we've all been there. I think weren't going quite so well. The guys upstairs, I want to fuck you. or the inevitable cat and mouse game, which is better. As when I came to this place from the AA and from Stadelschule, the key thing in all three institutions was, as a member of faculty, to know how to escape. You could see somebody really boring coming your way. Was there an alternative means to escape? It's a reverse cat and mouse game, because in fact, you know, here's a typical kind of Queensland guy hasn't been nice to see you in the building again, Jules. And Jules is, you know, and the other member of faculty say, oh, God, there's going to be someone getting on. You've got to have alternatives to the alternative means of escape. I mean, systems it's very central to the tradition of the English architectural mind to think of routeways first and what goes on from them secondly. What will you do if you're cornered? And the other thing is multifunction. I think one of the reasons that the jury liked our scheme was that they could see that it could be used for other things other than spotty architecture students sitting in the studio. And here it is being used, the street, of course, is being used as a sort of social space. And the fact that the spaces can be changed. And that they can take account of special events. This is probably Zama appearing like the Queen of Sheba, and the members of faculty lining up under the nose in the locker. Oh, that's And this was a symbolic one, which is to do with the fact that, you know, not only in a project does the intelligent teacher suggest that it might be all right, but it needs tweaking. And the same thing was happening to our building. Even having won the competition, we knew there would be a hell of a lot of tweaking involved. The street, in some ways, having said all that, is quite heroic and quite architectural. And the variety of spaces that then work over that, not only are the scoops varieties, but some of the bridge conditions. And of course, all the scribbling has, this is a wonderful bit of Gavin scribble, beautiful scribbles. But somebody comes and digs a hole, and suddenly the scribbling freezes. The hole is dug, the concrete is poured, and you're up and away. And I think Lorraine may be here, who's sweated at least a month on trying to rationalize not only the idea of the scoops, but how will you make them economic? How will you make them economic and not frightening to a fairly ploddy local constructor? And how will you actually be able to deal with them on half the hours? Because you buy in a patent system of German moving shuttering. But that's by the way. A lot of the time is spent in tweaking and the manoeuvring, but I think we've held on to the building pretty much. We are now beginning to see whether we're holding on to it. There are many systems involved. We're dealing with a hot, sometimes damp climate, very high intensity of sun, so the purpose of the scoops and any such conditions is to keep out the sun but let in the light. It's a subtle game. Here is a suggestion of that condition. See the nose poking out. I don't think that the foliage is going to be quite as wild as that. And the scoop and the nose lives. I'm delighted to report. Here is the nose already taking shape. The street behind it. The north facade dealing with local sun shading, because the north is after all a hot sun. And that in itself is going to be a fairly spooky sign, because it faces an extremely dull building. I'd say, hey, you're a dull building, we're going to enjoy ourselves. So the basics of the jolly street, the jolly sign are in fact a very wide variety. Window. And there are the scoops taking shape. More and more now, they are virtually all concrete buildings. And we have been able to design our own furniture. We've designed nearly 300 pieces, 11 types of furniture. And they have been made, guess where, in China, in Shenzhen, organized from Hong Kong. They are now being put in 2 very large crates and will be sent. We think our quality control is pretty good. 2 people carefully scrutinize every piece, and they will go as flat packed conditions to be erected in, and will have, I think, a fantastic effect on the building. This is just some of the tabletops photographed yesterday, as a matter of fact, in Hong Kong. And one of the assembled staff desks, complete with sort of habitat bits and bobs. And the effect of that furniture upon the building itself, which you can see that there are certain codes of things, but bearing in mind the relatively monochrome state of the spaces, then suddenly animated by these very brightly coloured, maneuverable tables, because most of them have interlocking conditions. You can have 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, 6 people, etc., etc. And there are some students, I think, being taken around the street. This is again 2 days ago, or actually they came in today, I'm not sure. They're very fresh. So the building is really getting near today. You can see the roof purlins, the steel purlins going on, and some of the light conditions beginning to affect us. But we've been very excited by seeing this stuff. And that was a few days ago. That's already out of date. And the roof is again a series of petals that sort of float over the building. So finally, I can report that from time to time, our old surviving Archigram friends come round to Crown. This is an occasion when Mike Webb drew an aeroplane and then Gavin would have folded his arms and then he sat down, drew another aeroplane. English boys draw aeroplanes. We enjoy ourselves sometimes. In fact, a lot of them. We keep amused. And we have special visitors sometimes. The ladies who work with us discuss spooks and other aspects of life. And this is a secret project, which maybe isn't a secret. It's a photograph this afternoon. It's something like this, which will be the first English building. And it will be in Bournemouth, of all places, where I first went to architecture school. The architecture school reformed and was part of one of the latest universities to be created in England, the Bartlett Arts University, who asked me to do a building for the practice of drawing, which will be used by all the departments of the university. And we're working flat up on it right now. And so it's nice to end up on that note, something that didn't exist before a week ago, and it's absolutely on today. The last dab of blue on that went on this morning just before the cloud came up from Bournemouth. So thank you for listening.
I think it's great to be.